Hello, YouTube. How is everyone today on this beautiful, wonderful Sunday? Everyone's doing well. So exciting to be here with you yet again for another live chat. Really look forward to these. I'm excited for all the wonderful questions that you have to give. So whenever you'd like, you can start asking those questions. Let's see, we have a few questions already. Let's see. I find it easy to lift and lower my soft palate, but I have a hard time widening the soft palate, back of my mouth, pillar or fosses. Do you have any suggestion? What should I do? I like to have a warmer and rounder sound when I sing. Great question. Great question. As you're alluding to, there's a lot of little fine-tuning changes that we can do in order to manipulate our voice. And I've always found, though, that sometimes starting with the fine-tuning can be a little more challenging than it is easy. And one of the best things we can do is find those extremes. So if you're really trying to mess with the soft palate, you're on the right track. It's first learn how to raise it all the way, then learn how to lower it all the way, and then trying to manipulate it in those other directions is a little more fine-tuning. But I always find the best way to get the in-betweens is to first go to the extremes. So I think to do this, you're going to want to go to the extremes of your resonance via the soft palate manipulation. And I would say for the motions that you're trying to accomplish, it might be a little harder to do it physically, right? In the sense of just trying to think of, let me move my palate. It might be a little bit easier to think about it tonally and then see the palate changes that result. So I would say aim for some voices, character voices, or singers that you like, trying to emulate that style and aim for the tone before aiming for the physical manipulation, because you already have good manipulation over the palate. So that missing piece, I think, will come from really trying to go to the extremes of emulating certain tones. So try to go the brightest you can, try to go the darkest you can. Try to go, as you said, rounder, try to go flatter. Really aiming for the extremes of those resonances will help you to do that. Because that is one of those body part movements that is hard to just do. You really have to find a way into that. Yeah, I hope that helps. Okay, let's see. Jan, I've finally been able to close the gap in my F sharp 2 to G sharp 4 region, thanks to your slide exercise. Yeah, that's fantastic. We talked about slides, for those who weren't here last time. Slide exercises are fantastic. We tend to just work our voice in very rigid scales, which is great. We need scales. I'm not putting down scales. But we also need to find those in-betweens. And oftentimes the difficulties transitioning between registers come from that fact that as we go from this step to this step, there's that missing spot in between that we haven't worked out yet. So if we work on sliding exercises, that's really going to help isolate those sections of our pitch range that aren't quite coordinated. I also would encourage, and I think I did last time, correct me if I'm wrong, but I also would encourage doing slides on sounds like NG, for example, because an NG sound really helps to minimize any extra involvement. You want, as best as you can, to have full control over everything and not have other things helping them. Slides help you to do that. That's great. Happy to see you, Anita, as well. Now that I've connected my chest to head voice without any gaps, I'm looking forward to connect my head voice to my flageolet register. Is that possible? The answer is yes. A lot of these terms get thrown around, and some people have different impressions of what these terms mean. But typically we say that a falsetto is that purely disconnected voice. A falsetto might be difficult to transition and slide into that flageolet, but that head voice, you might have a little bit easier time doing it with that. Yeah, but same answer is the slides. And when you're working with that flageolet, I would really work on sliding that around first. All right, so make sure you can really slide that around, and then you can try to bridge the gap and connect it with the head voice. But slides are the way to do it. You learned that. Hello, Vincent the Prince. Jan, if it's possible, what exercise? Same thing. Same thing, getting that sliding in between. And again, I probably say this every chat, but learning those extremes. Learning what a real flageolet feels like, learning what a real head voice feels like, and then trying to split that difference. But slides. Your question for today, Anita, is what is whisper singing? Does it cause any damage to the vocal cords? Let's talk about two things, whisper and whistle. Those are two different things. I just want to make sure we're not getting them confused. Whisper singing is not that common. That's just whispering. Hi, how are you? Like that. And there is a little bit of a rumor out there that if you whisper, you're damaging your vocal cords. My question to all of you is, have you ever heard of anybody whispering and hurting themselves? It's pretty rare. Now, to be fair, if you're blasting air through a whisper coordination, yes, that can be damaging. So if you're trying to be very loud while whispering, yes, that could be damaging. But the whole point of a whisper is that you're quiet, right? If you are just quietly whispering, hi, how are you? That's not going to cause any problems. But if you're trying to really shout that, that could be damaging. As far as singing in that style, one of the things that's interesting about that question is that technically a whisper doesn't carry with it any pitch. The vocal cords are not doing what they call the mucosal wave. They're not having a true vibration. So you can't really do pitches on singing, on a whistle, sorry, a whisper, there we go. You can't do singing on a whisper, but I suppose you could try to emulate some songs and people would know it just by hearing the words you're saying. But the whisper itself, not damaging, but also there's no real pitch there. Now that is different than whistle. Whistle is different, and I just want to make sure we're clear on these. Whistle is a type of vocal register, but it's different than all of the other vocal registers, such as vocal fry, chest, mix, head, flageolet. It's different than all of those because it doesn't actually use the vocal cords themselves. Pretty neat. So the vocal cords, they look like this. And as they close, if you close them super tightly, in the back, you can form a little hole. Kind of, see a little space in between my fingers? Kind of like that. So that's behind the vocal cords. So you lock the vocal cords, you squeeze that space, and you blow air through there. And it's like a whistle, right? What is a whistle here? Blowing air through a space. You can do that in the back of the vocal cords. And that, though, you actually can control the pitch, just like you can in this kind of whistle. The example of that is, of course, Mariah Carey's Emotions. Go listen to Mariah Carey's Emotions. She whistles a bunch of times in the song, but especially at the end, she has this movement of the whistle that's pretty phenomenal. So definitely check that out. Hope that answers the question. I'm glad Musicals 81 that helped. Janet, I'm so interested in the soft palate. Question the first one, widening. Is this part of a still palate anchoring? Find it by ear popping. Janet, I'm not trained in E-still, so I'm not sure specifically what they teach, but ear popping is related to the soft palate. You have something known as eustachian tubes that go from your ear canal back to back there, behind the throat there. And when there's pressure there, we feel a popping when that pressure releases, and you often can relieve that pressure via movement of the soft palate. Right, a yawn can really help you unpop that. So definitely related, but I'm not sure specifically how that relates to E still. Jan, when you touch your nose, it feels a lot easier to sing in the mix. And when I do nasal sounds, it seems a lot easier to mix. Yeah. And is there a relation to the soft palate? Yes, there is a relationship to the soft palate, and there's a relationship to why it makes it easier. Your soft palate, if anybody's seen my voice breakdown videos, you've heard me talk about this a lot. The soft palate is this trap door, right? When it's up, sound can't go into the nasal cavity, so it goes out of the mouth. When it's down and it touches the back of the tongue, you've now blocked air from coming out of the mouth, so sound goes into the nose. So first off, whenever you're doing a nasal sound, or your palate is down and it's going into the nose. That's how nasal resonance works. That's how nasal sounds work. So that's answering the part of, is it related to the soft palate? Yes. If the soft palate is down, you send sound into the nose. Now, how is it related to the mix and higher notes and things of that nature? I won't get too into the physics of it here, but depending on where you send that sound, meaning how much is in the nose, how much is in the mouth, and the balance of the two, that's going to affect the supraglottal pressure. That means the pressure acting back on top of the vocal cords, and in effect also the pressure beneath the vocal cords too. And when you balance that airflow out and throw some into the nose there, it makes it a little bit easier for the vocal cords to do those delicate coordinations that they need to do within the mixed voice or the head voice. Whereas if you're trying to do it all mouth resonance, there's going to be a lot of subglottal pressure there, and it's a little bit harder to do it. But as you think about the nasal resonance, it balances out those pressures that are acting on the vocal cords. And also, there's also some resonance features that just enhance certain pitches and certain pitch ranges. And as you go higher, we tend to need a little bit more of that nose stuff. Yeah, I hope that's helpful. And my last point about that would be to say it's definitely tricky to feel at first. And you mentioned touching your nose. That's a very good tactile feedback to determine whether or not you're actually sending sound there. Because I recognize at first it can be a little bit nebulous, a little bit unclear. Am I actually getting sound? Am I getting sound there? But if you're really feeling those vibrations there without squeezing the nose, just touching the nose, that's a good indication that you're doing that. Great questions. It's been a soft palate day. It's been a soft palate day. Keep those questions coming. I will say we did have a question written into us. Let me see. Okay, we had a question that was written into us about feeling discomfort during practice and how by the end of practice, this person is feeling a lot of discomfort around the neck. So I want to talk a little bit about healthy vocal technique and not developing any tension, pressure, strain, any of that. Two things. I'll try to make it two things. The first thing is if you're not feeling any discomfort in the beginning of your practice session, but then you are feeling it towards the end, if you're in the very beginning stages of singing, it might just be we need to gain a little more endurance, increase our practice time by a minute or two a day until that becomes easier. But it also can be the sign of some technique difficulty. The things that tend to cause pain, hoarseness, tension are, one, using too much or not enough airflow, right? Getting that balanced airflow is important. If you use too much airflow, you're going to be just blasting those vocal cords with these intense collision forces. That is not good. If we use too little airflow, you're going to rely on extrinsic pharyngeal musculature to try to force and muscle that sound out. Also not good. So make sure you're noticing if that's happening. Also, you might just have extrinsic laryngeal muscular tension to begin with. You might want to check out your larynx position, see if you're cranking that up, or if this is having a nice neutral balanced feel. Look out for muscles that are tensing. That might not bother you in the beginning of a practice session, but then as you get later and later in the practice session, it can definitely take a toll. And a little tip, we all know I love these extremes and opposites. A little tip would be try to do a practice where as you progress throughout the practice, you are giving less and less effort, right? Try to make it so you're going less and less. If you typically start your practice and by the end of it you feel a lot of tension and we want to balance that out, try to go down with the effort. Try to do a half an hour singing practice and start strong and get easier as we go throughout. That's going to help you taper it off to a more neutral, balanced amount of force. Okay, Anthony, how are you? If I'm not mistaken, I saw Justin say that it is often wrongly recommended to lift the soft palate, especially in classical singing. Why was that recommended? This is a two-parter. One, is it wrong? Two, why was it recommended? One, obviously, every voice teacher has their own training, their own opinions on things, and we are not in the business of saying anybody's right or wrong necessarily, but sometimes there are some scientific things we can point to that are pretty objective. And this relates to what I was just saying before about the soft palate and that nasal resonance. As you go higher, you need some of that. You really need that to help balance out the pressures there. And raising the soft palate limits or inhibits nasal resonance, right? The more raised that palate is, you're blocking sound going into the nose. If you lower it though, sound can go into the nose. So when you raise that palate, you are decreasing nasal resonance, which is necessary for those higher notes. Again, when you raise that palate, you are decreasing nasal resonance, which is necessary for those high notes. So that's one why it's quote unquote wrong. But secondly, why was it recommended in the classical world? I have some speculations, but I wasn't there, Anthony. I don't know. But I think some of the speculations are because of the tone that is accomplished by that. That darker, more classical tone is accomplished, oftentimes by raising the palate. I also, this is just speculation, but there tends to be a relationship between raising the palate and lowering the larynx. They tend to go together, whereas raising the larynx and lowering the palate go together. They tend to go together. They don't have to, but they tend to. And a lot of folks in the classical world do not like a raised larynx. And so lifting the palate helps to lower the larynx, helps to create that nice open space that classical singers are going for. Again, I still think some nasal resonance could really help them, but I get the idea, trying to create that tone and that sound. But that being said, we've talked a lot here about larynx height as well. And yes, larynx height is a style changer. So if you're doing that more classical or operatic sound, you do want a neutral, if not lower, larynx. But a high larynx is not so bad if we're doing pop or rock, as long as you're doing that larynx position because you want to, not because you have to do the technique. That's my answer. Jan, when I'm going from a head dominant mix and adding more chest into it, what is happening anatomically to my vocal cords? I really want to know more about those cricothyroid stuff that I've looked up. Okay, a couple things are happening. So you're adding more chest. Remember that these terms chest and head were used before we entirely knew what was going on there. And so now those terms don't refer to just one thing, right? Sometimes there's a little more volume in a chest voice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There can be different things added. But I would say the two main things that are going on when you're adding more chest and connection into that head voice, or that head dominant mix, is one, you're getting more engagement of the thyroarytenoid muscle and less engagement of that cricothyroid muscle. I wish I had my larynx here. I don't have a model larynx. It is at the studio. But long story short, you have your thyroid cartilage. This is the shield-like cartilage in the front. My Adam's apple right here is showing all of you that cartilage. Then underneath that, there's a ring-like cartilage, and this sits right on top of the trachea, right on top of that windpipe. So right on top of that is something called the cricoid cartilage. There are muscles that run from the cricoid to the thyroid. Okay, from the thyroid to the cricoid to the thyroid, whatever you want to say. So far, we're all with me still? When those muscles contract, it pulls the thyroid and cricoid towards each other. Now, why does that matter? That raises our pitch. And the reason that raises our pitch is right behind that thyroid are the vocal cords. They're right attached to it. And so when the thyroid and cricoid come together, you're stretching those vocal cords. You're stretching those vocal cords. Now, there's also something known as the thyroarytenoid. So, all things in anatomy are named after what they're connected to. Cricothyroid muscle is from the cricoid to the thyroid, right? Thyroarytenoid goes from the thyroid to the arytenoid. So as I mentioned, here's your thyroid, here's your vocal cords, and then it's connected to these two cartilages known as the arytenoids that move your vocal cords, okay? Those vocal cords have a muscle underneath them, the thyroarytenoid muscle. When you're using your chest voice, that muscle is contracting more. Versus when you're doing more of your head voice stuff, the cricothyroid muscle is having more activation. So the first piece is that muscle is more activated. I know it's a bit confusing without diagrams to show all of you, but if you want me to explain it again, I totally will. The second thing that I would say is happening is something called vocal cord compression. Your vocal cords, when they come together and you blow air through them, they get sent into vibration. But it's not just on or off. We have degrees of how tightly or loosely those cords are coming together, and we call that compression. And so when you're doing a chest voice, there tends to be more compression. Compression is a bit easier the lower you are, for the reason that the shorter and thicker the cords are, they have more of a height to them. So they're able to press against each other a little easier. But then as you go higher, they tend to thin out and even space out a little bit as they're being stretched. And so what you need to do is apply that medial compression to get them to really come together there. Yeah, so again, when you're adding more of that chest quality, more of that thyroarytenoid muscle engagement, a little more compression. There are some other things, as I mentioned. Sometimes we can talk about adding a little bit more of airflow, but me personally, I'm a little bit cautious about that just because I'm always concerned with people injuring themselves. Also doing more of a shout function, opening the mouth wider, that can give it a beltier, chestier sound. Those are all involved. So the answer to your question is a lot's going on. Let me know if that was helpful or if I need to explain any of that anatomy a little more. Vincent, Could you talk about how a clean tone can be achieved in the chest voice? I struggle to not use twang when I belt. Are there any exercises you can recommend? Mhm. When we say clean tone, there's a few things we can mean by that. And you contrasted it with twang, but then you also said chest voice and belt. So we have a few things going on here. Let's be clear that a chest voice doesn't have to be a belt, right? Mum is a chest voice, and I'm not belting, right? How to create a clean tone down there. Same way we create a clean tone anywhere, which is get the resonance to be as balanced as possible. Play with the larynx position, soft palate position, mouth size and shape. Additionally, there's another place that our tone can come from, and that's the laryngeal area itself. One, the vibration of the vocal cords might not be as clean as you want. I don't think that's what you're referring to because you mentioned twang, but you might be thinking about the tone of the chords themselves. There could be a little bit of distortion there and things of that nature. If there's distortion at the vocal cord level, we can talk about that, but I think you're more so talking about the resonance. And I would say typically in your low chest voice, twang is not present. It's only once you try to belt and go higher. And while twang is a little bit difficult just to control on its own, because it's a body part known as the aryepiglottic folds that is a little difficult to just feel, it does tend to get lumped together with a high larynx. Again, they're not the same thing, but they tend to get lumped together. So I would work on some low larynx exercises, specifically on the ascent. I've done some of these before, but a gi-o is my favorite. Gi, normal larynx on gi, gi-o. See that? On the ascent, I drop it. Gi-o. And that's extreme. But that'll help you as you get more belty. Gi-o. Right? And then you can find a little more balance. Gi-o. So that's how I would say work on those resonances. Work on if there's any distortion in the voice. Let me know if that's a problem too. But to get rid of the twang, I would first do some low larynx stuff and then progress your way to a balanced neutral larynx. Anita, how can I produce vibrato in my chest voice? I try it most of the time, but I'm not able to produce. What could be wrong? There's two ways to get at any vocal problem, basically. One, dive into the technique. Two, have an image or a character or a feeling that gets you there, right? And with vibrato, so if you're wondering about those two things, they're both helpful. I just tend to be more on the technique, finding out what's going on side, because that's how my brain works. But not everybody works that way. Some people need to hear the idea of, imagine a tidal wave is crashing, and that creates an image for them and it helps them get there. And I've had times in my life where I have needed that image too. I found for vibrato, while I'm going to teach you a technical thing to practice it, I found that more than most vocal technique things, that an image does work well for that, right? So I would really try to take a step outside your comfort zone, pretend to do opera voices, pretend to just go over the top with the theatrics and the vibrato and the shaking. It's going to really help give you a sense of that. You know, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the song Out There from The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It's been the song for me this week. I've just been singing it and listening to it. And the vibrato on the original recording is really fast. It's pretty great. And I remember thinking, wow, that's an awesome vibrato. I don't know if I could do it that well. But then I tried to sing the song and I didn't do it that well. But then I got into the song right? I imagine myself being Quasimodo, and it really helped me find it. It was just a very strange thing. So sometimes the character can help you get there, experiment with that. But as far as an exercise, what I usually do is I'll do an exercise that helps you quickly oscillate between notes. And yes, vibrato isn't between two actual notes, it's around one note. By doing between a semitone, a half step, that really helps you get the same feeling. And then as you try to do it faster and faster and faster, just by the nature of the fact that we tend to cheat things a little bit, you're gonna probably not even go a full semitone, and you'll be able to do that. So here's my favorite one. Meet, 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 meet me. Meet, 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 meet me. That's my favorite one. I believe I took that from Justin. I think that's where I got that one from. Meet, 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 meet me. Move it up, move it down, and then speed it up and slow it down. Meet, meet, me, or meet, meet me. And then you step off it, meet, me. And you have a little bit of a vibrato there, or at least the starting of one. You just might need to be a little more intentional about it while in those low areas. And let me dispel the myth that vibrato should come naturally, or it's not real vibrato. It's not true. Not everyone does it come naturally for. That's not what the chords naturally do. That's just not true. It is a learned behavior. Some people just learn it naturally because it feels right to them, meaning it just sounds, they hear voices like that, so they imitate it, and it happens easy. For others of us, it doesn't, right? But don't think that if straight tone is easier for you, that you're doing something wrong. It's just tricky. Also, vibrato can be harder in the chest voice because, again, we have more of that mass of the chords coming together. You have more to move, whereas up top, they're lighter. It's easier to move them around. Anthony, thank you. So for practicing classical singing and try to keep a low larynx on high notes to achieve this classical sound, should we still try to have nasal resonance and a low, soft palate? Yes, that's what I'd like you to try to do. And remember, this is all degrees, right? It's all degrees. Try the extremes so you know what it feels like, but it's a degree. And really, yes, there is merit to saying, I want to sing in this particular style. And if you're performing in that, if you're doing a show in that, sure, you do need to match it. But if you're just trying to create your own voice, find what you like. Record yourself doing the various palate positions and find what you like. But yeah, see if you can get a low larynx with nasal resonance. I would recommend doing similar to before. I did that low larynx drop. Gyo. Maybe do it on an NG. Guillaume, Guillaume. See what I just did? That was the lowest palate I could do, but a low larynx as well. Guillaume. And then eventually you can bridge that gap. Guillaume, Guillaume. That's got some nasal resonance, but it's a low larynx. But obviously you want this up top, so try it up top as well. Jan, what an explanation about crico and thyroid. I'm glad. So much has been clarified. You're welcome. Jan, you are speaking my language. I love talking about anatomy. That is my favorite thing to talk about. So I'm happy to talk cricothyroids and thyroarytenoids and aryepiglottic folds all day long. You just let me know. Hi, Sammy. Trisha told me to ask you about float tanks. For those who don't know, Trisha is one of our speech coaches over at New York Speech Coaching, and she's wonderful. If you want speech coaching online, or if you're in the Georgia area, check out Trisha. And I'll just spend 10 seconds on float tanks. Float tanks are a type of relaxation therapy. They're wonderful. You should all go try it. Jan, is it possible to vibrate each chord in a different frequency. Yes, yes, very hard, and usually occurs due to a disorder as opposed to control. Let me break this down. If the chords are lacking a type of symmetry, whether it be due to one chord not moving over as much as the other, or whether it be due to a sizing issue of the chords, which is rare but happens, or whether it be due to a lesion on one chord and not on the other, these can all affect how they vibrate, and so they might vibrate out of sync of each other. Also, there's ways to create two pitches instead of the full length of the chord being the issue. You can also have different vibratory cycles across the length of the chord. So you can squeeze one part of the chord, have the front half be vibrating different than the back half. Really tricky. This also might happen again with lesions. Things like vocal nodules can sometimes cause a gap in the chords, which could cause two vibrations going on. There are some people who are able to control this, though. What is her name? Hathaway? Lala Hathaway? Look her up on YouTube. Great videos where she's controlling her diplophonia, controlling her two pitches. It can be done. If you're wondering, I'm still trying to figure out how to do it myself. Sammy, can you share the basics of improving one's prosody, intonation in everyday speech? Yeah, I can. Prosody, for those who don't know the speech term, is the rhythmic or melodic patterns or inflections in your speech. If I'm being my purely objective sound engineer self, there is no such thing as a bad intonation or prosody. If I'm being a little more real world practicality, there are certain patterns that can be either distracting or bothersome to people, or that can convey something you're not trying to convey. The first step to gaining a good prosody would be learning how to control our sense of urgency while speaking. Many of us, if not all of us, tend to speak first, think later. Right? We tend to speak first, think later. And look, we all make mistakes in our speech. It happens. But as much as we can minimize that, the better. When we speak right away and have all of that urgency, we're not in full control of our prosody or our articulation for that matter. The first step, therefore, is to control that speed and make sure that you're going at the speed you want to versus the speed that your body is compelling you to. The second thing would be to focus on the melodic patterns. Different countries and different languages have different melodic patterns. Therefore, I'm just going to speak to standard English for now, since that's what we're communicating in. And with this, I'm making this really simplified, but there are essentially 3 different things we can do. I'm really simplifying it. We could emphasize a word. We could have a slight raise, or we can come down. Raise, down. I'm really simplifying. But those are 3 ways you can think about your inflection. Regarding the emphasis, make sure you're emphasizing the word or words that you want to. Regarding that down speak, most sentences should go down at the end. That being said, sometimes we do want to go up at the end, but be careful because going up at the end can sometimes sound like a question. For example, are you going to the movies tomorrow? We go up. If you do that during a statement, it sounds like you're asking a question. And inherent to asking a question is that you don't know the answer. That's why you ask it. And therefore, when you say it during a question, it's going to throw things off. For example, Imagine you all were looking for a new doctor, and I gave you two choices. Doctor number one said to you, I'm a doctor. Hear that downward pitch? I'm a doctor. Doctor number two said to you, I'm a doctor? I'm a doctor? I wouldn't want him or her anywhere near me, right? I don't trust it because it seems questioning. So I would say find a way to gain control over that inflection and to make sure it goes down at the end when you're trying to be declarative. I also would say, though, be sure to have variety. The same inflection the entire time can be very boring. It can lose your audience and not be engaging. To recap, control your speed, know your pitch inflections, and use vocal variety. I hope that's a start. And go use float tanks. Anita, I'm glad the explanation helped. Vincent, in response to my last question, you mentioned the type of distortion that is created by the vocal cords themselves. Could you talk about distortion that is generated from the vocal cords? Yes, I can. Let's put it into three broad categories. One, distortion due to damage. It's a very broad category because you can have tons of vocal cord damage. Nodules, polyps, cysts, sulcus, the list goes on. Not to scare everyone. You're all being very healthy and learning about good vocal technique. You won't hurt yourselves. But that can cause distortion if there's just a not good wave vibration due to a lesion or something on the vocal cords. That can cause distortion. That's not distortion you're controlling. In some ways, though, it's the safest kind because you're already injured. It's not doing anything worse to the cords. It's just what happens. So in some ways, it's healthier than trying to add distortion because it's just how your voice sounds now, but I don't wish damage on any of you. The second type of distortion, and my favorite, is vocal fry. Vocal fry is a register. We've talked about it on here before, and it's considered a distortion by some of us because it's not a pure tone. Let me give you all 1 minute of speech science here. Have you ever wondered why this sounds like a note and this doesn't? The frequencies that are vibrating in one versus the other, in the note, the sound waves are very periodic. Periodic means there's a pattern. It looks relatively the same. Now we're humans, so we're not perfect, so it's not a perfect pattern, but it's perfect enough that we perceive it as a note. The more aperiodic that pattern is, the more unpattern-like, the more it sounds like noise. Notes versus noise. That's why things sound like music versus things sounding like okay? So anything that causes an aperiodicity, anything that ruins that pattern is distortion. And vocal fry is a pattern, but it's way less pattern-like than a normal has that and we can make that more pattern-like. That has a pretty consistent feel to it, or all over the place and not pattern-like. Here it's really off pattern, it's not consistent. So the more we play with that aperiodicity, the more distortion we get. And if you mess with the resonance, you can get some really cool sounds. Yo, yo. That's vocal fry, but it sounds all distorted. I like vocal fry because you can't really do vocal fry using tons of airflow. So it keeps that airflow minimal, so you know you're not blasting air through there. It doesn't damage the cords that way. Another way is you could put a little more air through there, keep the vocal cords a little more relaxed immediately. So vocal fry, they come together, but if you relax them and you put air through there, kind of like a big sigh, That's also a way to distort it. A little more dangerous than a vocal fry, but we use it. Check out voice breakdown episode, I don't know, the one with Scooby-Doo. I use that distortion on Scooby-Doo. Ooh, Scooby-Doo has that kind of distortion. So if you want to minimize that distortion, you need a better mucosal wave, a better vibration. The more pattern like that vibration, the better, or more, I shouldn't say better, the more note like the sound. Jan, what are the main differences between men's vocal cords and women's vocal cords? I mean, it seems way more easier to figure out flageolet and other stuff to women than it is to men. I have to say, I think it's actually easier for men. Maybe that's because I am one, I don't know. But it's just, for some reason, it makes a little more sense to me. For women, it was a little more of a mystery for me to crack up front. But the difference mainly is vocal cord length and width. That's really it. Men, when they go through puberty, their vocal cords dramatically increase in size, whereas women's don't. They do increase, but not as dramatically. So we're just dealing with bigger, longer, thicker cords for men than women. That causes vocal changes to happen in different places, and it also affords men to have a little bit more of a range sometimes than women. I hate to be a downer for the women out there, but men just tend to be able to go lower and oftentimes can still go pretty high because there's, believe it or not, less of a ceiling than there is a floor. There's usually a floor. Unfortunately, you can improve your low notes, you definitely can, but there tends to be a spot where, as many voice teachers say, they're non-negotiable, meaning you will bottom out in a true chest voice, then you have to flip the vocal fry. Whereas you can really kind of stretch those chords pretty infinitely. But that's the main difference, is just the size, the length, the width. But there definitely needs to be a little bit more research on the resonance qualities of men and women, because, you know, this is me just thinking off the top of my head here, but you can have men and women who have the same size oral cavity, nasal cavity, pharyngeal cavity, right? Men and women can be the same size, yet those vocal cords are going to be different sizes. So I would imagine that the physics behind that has to be at play as well. And so, Jan, I suggest you join a research team and find out the answer to that question. That question that nobody was asking until I just asked it, right? But it's important. Let's find out. Sammy, I always appreciate how calm your answers are. Oh, I'm glad. You make it very easy to focus. Well, Sammy, I want to say quickly, you mentioned about prosody. Just so everyone knows, it's no secret, I'm controlling my speech as I talk to you. Sometimes I'll speed up for effect, sometimes I'll slow down for effect, but as you control that sense of urgency and control the prosody, the very thing you were asking me about, yeah, people tend to learn better, and I throw that variety in there. If we go back on the tape, you will see times where I intentionally speed up. It helps engage. Little speech tricks here. What can you tell me about the subharmonic register? Again, I've heard this phrase used in a few different ways. I've heard some people talking about it in terms of vocal fry. That's usually how I hear it. It's just beneath the chest voice there. But that might be a good question for the good sir Justin Stoney. To be quite honest with you, we don't encounter it too much. At least I haven't encountered it too much in my singing work. Yeah. Great questions today, guys. Great questions. I say it every time, but I truly look forward to these chats. It's great. What else would I rather be doing than talking with a bunch of singing and speech students about singing and speech? Sammy. Yeah, how to sing really, really low. That's what we were saying before. I don't want to discourage you from this, but there is going to be a floor. There is a place where you just can't go past anymore. That being said, if I were you, I would focus on two things. One, pay attention to resonance things, especially larynx height as you go low. Sometimes we tend to really lower our larynx, and actually a little raise down low can help us get a few extra semitones, believe it or not. So it's almost like an hourglass where instead of just getting lower and lower, there's a place where you kind of need to go higher with it again. So first, I would pay attention to your larynx height. And secondly, I would work on sliding. That's been our big theme today, sliding and soft palate. Slide from your chest into your vocal fry. That'll help you bridge that gap a little bit. First, you can do it mum 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 mum. So the first part of it, mum mum mum, is steppy, and then slide mum until eventually it's that mum and slide into that vocal fry. Over time, you'll be able to really control that slide in and out, and you'll likely be able to hold on to that chest voice just a little longer and get to that subharmonic area that you're looking for. Yeah, Jan's got it right. That's how I've always understood subharmonic. That's why I just tend to call it vocal fry, and most of my students do too. But again, ask Justin about it. And as Jan is saying, it helped him develop a lower register. That's exactly what I'm saying. Learn how to go from that chest into that vocal fry, and you'll definitely get another note or two out of that. How do I join the research team? We unfortunately don't have a research team. New York vocal coaching, researching, I'm sure will be in the future, but we don't have one. But I definitely would recommend looking into that. How do I join a vocal research team? It must be a great feeling to be able to lend yourself to science like that. I would love to. I'm actually very interested soon, something that we've been talking about. I'd really like to scope myself while doing some of these distortions. As many of you know from the voice breakdown video, we do a lot of different distortions, and a lot is still needed to be known about that. So Jan, I'm trying to get into that research field too, and research myself a little bit and see what's happening during that. The more vocal research we can get going, the better. We have a lot going for us. We know a lot about the voice, but there is still so much more to find out. Have a great day, Sammy. Sammy says, have a great day. Try the float tank. You have to try it out. Trisha liked it. So, Brendan, how have you started to get interested in vocal coaching? Tell us your story. Yeah, I'll tell a story quickly. Lifelong talker and musician. Lifelong talker and musician. You could never shut me up as a child. And as I got older and was attending college, I discovered something known as speech pathology. And I thought, wait, I can talk all day and help people talk all day. And not only is it enjoyable for me, but it makes a difference in people's lives and actually helps people, because that is something I was very eager to do. And so I got into speech pathology. Remember, at this time, still being a performer, a singer, and as I was getting into speech pathology, I learned about voice disorders. And it was an area of the field that I really, really took to. We have different areas of the field, just like doctors. You can be a different type of doctor, a cardiologist or a neurologist. In speech pathology, there's different fields, one of them being the voice. And so I was fascinated by it, decided I wanted to go into it. Consequently, at the same time, I also injured my voice. And so it was a real learning experience having my own voice disorders, plural, that I had to deal with, and it made me even more motivated to help people. Then how I got into vocal coaching and singing specifically is that, again, always a singer, always a lifelong musician, but I realized that within speech pathology, we didn't really talk about singing much. We just didn't. And to me, it seemed like a disservice to people who had injured themselves singing, because they would just go to a voice teacher who might not know about the disorders, or they might go to a speech pathologist who knows about the disorders but doesn't know about the singing. And being a voice therapist who doesn't fix singers, to me, felt like being a mechanic who only fixes trucks, right? It's only one specific thing. I wanted to be able to help everyone. And so I decided, let me find the best vocal coach I can and combine my science of speech pathology with the artistry of the singing voice. I'll put them together and I'll be able to help everyone, right? That was the goal, help as many people as possible. And I discovered Justin Stoney. You might have heard of him. And he loved the idea. I took his voice teacher training program, and that in combination with all of my lifetime of musical experience and teaching some lessons through my own musical education, I combined all that together and became the person I am today. That's my story. And I love it. I am so glad this field found me. It's truly a blessing in my life, and I'm thankful for it every day. We have 4 minutes and counting, everybody. Get your last questions in. Last questions. By the way, I should mention to everyone, another episode of Voice Breakdown is coming out on the channel this evening. I'm sure you'll all get notifications for that, but I highly suggest checking it out. It's episode 3 of our SpongeBob series, and it's Mr. Krabs. Arr, 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 arr. So very exciting for all of you to see me make a fool out of myself and sound like Mr. Krabs. Yes, that is how I met Leonardo DiCaprio, Jan. That's exactly how I met him. Exactly how I met him. You know, nobody tells me I look like Leonardo DiCaprio. Only Justin gets that. Yeah. Sammy is right. You do have a calming voice. You should narrate meditation tapes. Thank you, Vincent. Thank you. I would love to. I would absolutely love to. Imagine the ocean is before you. That would be great. Everyone can have a calming voice if you learn how to manipulate it, for sure. Let's not get stuck thinking our voice is only one way. We can change it and have the voice we want. Can you talk more about how to do that Joker distortion? Yeah. Great question, Vincent. I'll answer that after. But Jan, quickly, the Joker distortion. There's a couple different ones I'm using there. I do use some vocal fry as his pitch descends. I use a little bit of that vocal fry, but you're probably thinking of the that kind of distortion, and that's something called aryepiglottic distortion. Best way I can get you to get there is think about falsetto, and then think about things such as AC/DC's Back in Black, or wow, I feel good. That'll help you get there. It's using twang, it's extreme twang, which will bring those arytenoids together and flop them around. And then Vincent, who would play me in a movie, Vincent? I get told I look like a few different people. None of them do I think I look like. But I get Jerry Seinfeld all the time. I get Woody from Toy Story. I get Seth Meyers. I get, who's the other one I get? Eddie Redmayne a lot, I get. So I don't know. If you combine all those human beings into one person, that might be who plays me in a movie. I'd rather see the Justin Stoney movie, so Leonardo DiCaprio can play him. Jan, you've tried it, but as soon as you do, you think something's wrong. Something's only wrong. Well, typically something's only wrong if it's hurting you. I would just say go easy on it. It's loud, but it's not as loud as it seems. I'm not giving that much energy, if that helps. So don't push it. Just wah, wah. It's pretty light. Anthony, you're very welcome. You have a nice day as well. Yes, Eddie Redmayne, Jerry Seinfeld, they could all play me. Who are these people? Why? How? That'd be great. All right, everyone. Truly, truly a pleasure. I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Oh, one more question from Jan. Can you do an example of transition from head to flageolet? Yeah, that's going to be, take that to that head. A little more falsetto-y, but that's fine. Best I can do right now. Save it for next time, and we'll talk about it more then. All right, everyone. Have a wonderful, wonderful Sunday. I'll see you all next time on the chat. Have a good day, Anita.